here is, the question is, why is it now, as the ballots are coming out, the budget is fine? When over the last several months, Wildcat Lake Park was closed, funds were transferred from the Veterans Program, and sheriff's deputies were being cut. Josh, that goes to you.
Well, I don't agree with the premise of the question for one. In June, the county commissioner sent out a budget call letter. We knew the cuts that we would have to make to balance our budget for 2011. That number was $3.7 million. And the county also decided at the time that we would set aside $1 million of reserves. So we knew that we would need to cut to balance the budget and add $1 million to reserve, $4.7 million. For the last several months, we've been very thoughtfully moving through a process of figuring out where do we cut. And contrary to everything that I hear from my opponent about across-the-board cuts, the reality is that as I'm standing before you today, we have directed departments and outside agencies to make cuts ranging from about 2% to 22%. We've cut our Sheriff's Department 2%. We've cut programs that we feel are much more, that are certainly lower priorities for the community, drastically less. So that's the process we've been going through. That's how you balance the budget and make decisions at the county.
Well, that's exactly what I think the question was saying, is that now all of a sudden everything is fine, because in March we transferred the portion of the property tax designated for the veterans because we were in trouble. And then we went on to see that Wildcat Lake and Horseshoe Lake were closed. And then we were told in June that they needed to discuss taxes with the taxpayers because we were in such a budget crisis. And then as I went to get my endorsement from the sheriff's deputies and the Corrections Guild, many of them were training in Pierce County or other counties because they knew their jobs were gone. And trust me, they didn't think this was a preliminary step where they might get their jobs back. I got phone calls from people thanking me because I made pressure on this issue. And I can play it for any of you if you want. They knew their jobs were gone. So we've got a dilemma here. Either we were being lied to as taxpayers, and there was nothing wrong with the budget ever, and we didn't need to discuss taxes and we didn't need to close parks, or the sheriff's deputies and their families were lied to and they should have been told in the first place that they shouldn't have to look for other jobs. So those are the two options that we have here. Either everything was fine or it wasn't, but we should have known that then.
Thank you, Abby. And staying with you, Abby, staying on the tax issues, is what are some of the ways the county can reduce expenditures and its budget in this tough economic climate? What reductions have been made?
What reductions have been made or what reductions should be made?
Well, it says what reductions have been made, so let me ask you what reductions should be made.
Well, where I see us having the biggest problem is administrative overhead. I think when we look at departments, frankly, like the Law and Justice budget, we have some administrative overhead there. I think Parks and Rec, we have some administrative overhead. I think we have a lot of people in the county we didn't used to have when times weren't so good and when times were better. We have a county administrator. We have a county lobbyist. These are positions that need to be looked at if we're going to continue paying our county commissioners at the salaries that we're paying them. Because basically the jobs that these people were hired to do, the county administrator handles their union contracts. The county lobbyist handles the state legislature. We really need to start looking at those things first. I like the idea of dealing with the union contracts, but I think we need to be careful when we're doing that. Some of these people are people working at Wildcat Lake Park that make $22 an hour. So we need to really look and see when we're reworking those contracts, who we're affecting and how we're affecting them. And I think we need to make sure that we're actually respecting our workers enough that our administrative staff is scaled down first.
Thank you. Josh, same question.
Well, backing up to the previous question just slightly, there's a real misunderstanding of the county's budget here. And the fact is we have made a lot of cuts. When you look at the cuts that we've made just this year, our preliminary budget, we're cutting roughly $5 million of expenditures. We've had hours reduced for our county employees. I appreciate you attacking our county administrator, who has had a 15% reduction in her pay. We have frozen my salary for the next 4 years, and I've been self-paying my medical expenses at the county for the last several years, as has the entire Board of Commissioners. So we've been trying to do things in a very thoughtful manner. Some immediate things that you see that the county has made cuts to and is planning to cut for next year. We've reduced hours and our abilities to maintain parks. Many of you saw in the paper that we're not going to be able to contribute to the rodeo purse next year. That is something that the community is going to have to help the county support. We needed to rely more on volunteers. So we've made a lot of cuts, and there's more things we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Well, staying on a somewhat same topic is, the question is, with 18 different bargaining units to deal with, county governments are subject to huge expenses to manage labor relations. Would you encourage your legislators, as well as the Washington Association of Counties, to introduce and support legislation that reduces the number of bargaining units? Question to you, Josh.
Well, the issue isn't the number of bargaining units. And under collective bargaining laws, folks can form whichever unions they want. The issue is, what kind of contracts do we have with those unions? And when I became commissioner in 2007, the contracts that I inherited from my predecessors were not sustainable. They were negotiated during the lean years. And they were contracts that were too expensive for the county to afford. We knew that when the economy was strong, but unfortunately, we were locked into these 3-year contracts for 2007, 2008, and 2009. Today, we have all of our contracts open. That is why the county commissioners have been able to implement 0% COLAs with those open contracts. At the same time, we're looking at a significant compensation reform for our county employees, moving away from a system where we compare our county employees to other public sector employees, and moving to a system where we compare total compensation to the local job market. I don't want to hire people at the county because what Spokane or Whatcom County can pay. I want to hire people in Kitsap County for what the local job market will bear.
Thank you. Abby, same question?
No, I don't think they need to reduce the number of bargaining units. But one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of these contracts have been up for some time. So if they were going to renegotiate these contracts in this manner, it should have been done. This is what we're seeing, is a lot of things happening in the last 2 weeks, a lot of things being said that they've had time to do. And so it's frustrating for me as a candidate to get up here and debate things that all of a sudden are going to be fixed or have been fixed that weren't fixed in the past. I want to know whose contracts and how they plan to amend these so that we can debate that. That's the problem that I see, rather than the number of bargaining units, is why haven't these contracts been negotiated already? If so, if this is how they want to do it, why don't we know the specifics of that and which bargaining units they're going to renegotiate and how they're going to renegotiate?
Thank you. So then the question is, what tax rate is enough, and the line enough is underlined, I should say, for county government, and do you support a state income tax? So what tax rate is enough for county government, and do you support a state income tax? Abby?
Well, the 1% property tax cap is what the county has to live within without a vote of the people. So everything else, the income tax, I don't support state income tax, but the county doesn't have an effect on that. As far as the 1% property tax, and I know everybody thinks that this is crazy, I don't think they should be raising that property tax 1% right now. And I really think that what's happening is we're seeing people, like someone that works at Wildcat Lake making $22 an hour, where that actually matters to them. They actually may lose their house over a very small line where taxes are creeping in and making it so that they can't afford to keep their home. And I haven't seen, when I've worked at Washington Policy Center or for Senator McCaslin, where you couldn't look at budgets and find a lot more to cut than they were willing to cut, and still keep the level of service within the county. And so you could call me out on that later if you want, if I'm just wrong. But what I think is that the county is not being completely honest about where the money's going and how it's being spent. I think that even when I volunteered at Wildcat Lake, you could see that park never should have been closed.
Thank you. Josh?
Well, I'm getting pretty tired of being told that we're not being honest or upfront when this Board of County Commissioners has, for the first time, televised our budget meetings, made all of our materials available online, invited citizens to sit at the table to help make decisions along with all of our departments. That's first. As it applies to the county's taxes, we're locked in at the local level. Many of the decisions in terms of how much the county can bring in terms of revenue is decided down in the legislature. Over the last 4 years, the county has lived within the 1% cap, and we haven't raised sales taxes. Other counties have approached voters, such as King County, this year, in this November, with a massive sales tax increase. Kitsap County hasn't done it. And I just find it very disingenuous to share with all of you, that my opponent just did, that she would not raise property taxes to 1%, which for the average home in Kitsap County is $1 a year. That's what we're talking about. At the same time that the previous Board of Commissioners, a Republican board, voted for the 1% increase every year during good times.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, sorry about that. I'll have to cut you off. Now let's move on to actually another hot button issue. Seems like we have a few on in our county. Just keep you guys rolling. I mean, who needs coffee this morning, right? Okay, so competing jurisdictions, cities, Indian tribes, and the federal government expand their territories at the expense of Kitsap County's tax base. What actions can you take as county commissioner to minimize the impact on your constituents? Josh.
Well, I guess there's a couple layers. I don't think that's really an annexation question. I think that's a question about.
It is meant as an annexation, such as Silverdale Incorporation. Do I read this correctly, sir? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess a couple things. First of all, it's pretty obvious in our county that our industrial base is the federal government. If you look at the jobs at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, where my dad works, and over 10,000 employees, that's what drives our economy. And certainly, it is an impact to the city of Bremerton and to the county, the fact that that property is off the tax rolls. But when it comes to expanding, whether it's school property that's being expanded, fire districts buying new parcels, those are things where the county has very limited ability to say no to. What we need to do is be pretty thoughtful about how the county works with the issues of annexations and incorporations. We've seen more annexations in the past year and a half than we've seen in Kitsap County in a long time. Those will continue. We know Port Orchard wants to continue to grow. The county wants to have a collaborative working relationship. We've done a lot of analysis for the first time so that we know when these areas annex or when they incorporate, how much sales tax revenue the county will lose. And that's going to help us guide a lot of the decisions that we're going to have to make in the coming months and years.
Thank you. Abby?
Well, that's actually why I really want to start looking at how we're going to structure this budget in the future, not just in the next year, is because these annexations are going to cause financial strain on the county budget. I don't feel like what's happening right now is that there's a collaborative working agreement with these areas trying to annex in. We've seen that with Port Orchard. There's an agreement right now where it's been difficult for Port Orchard to work with the county on those annexations. And I think we're going to see that happening more and more because, we have Silverdale Incorporation, and I think that it's going to happen. I think that we need to expect that it's going to happen. And I think that the business owners are frustrated because they don't feel they're getting the service out of the county that they can expect for the amount of tax dollars that they're bringing in. I think it's a reasonable expectation of theirs. When I've talked to people in the city of Port Orchard, they've been very frustrated in dealing with the county. And I think that we need to start working on that relationship so that we can make sure that it goes smoothly. Look, we have less services to provide when they do annex in. And I think we need to take that into consideration as well.
Thank you. All right, so now moving on.